Good morning. Welcome to the Higher View. I'm Dr. Laura, and I have two amazing guests today. I have Annie and Laura Meeks. Welcome. And they do go to our center, and they're just two amazing women. And Annie, you've got some news. You just retired after how many years?
Well, actually, this was retiring my third time. I'm one of those people that retired from the Air Force, and then I retired from we owned our own company. And then the last one was working in the healthcare system at Calipatria State Prison. So I'm ready to be through.
Finally
working.
Retired.
This is
retired.
That's right.
So today's talk is going to be about change and adapting, because God knows 2020 has been about massive changes in our life. Nothing is normal anymore. Nothing, or what we considered normal, what we thought our life was going to be. And you two exemplify that more than any two people I know. I mean, talk about a love story. And I know you're working on a book, right? You guys are working on a book. And I remember Annie at one point, when we were still meeting face to face, was talking about maybe having like a Showtime or an HBO series about your story. So I just want all our listeners, if you are life is changing for you, and you're going, woe is me, feeling sorry for yourself because life isn't what you thought it was going to be. I want to talk to Laura and Annie about their life. And so you two met how many years ago?
1984. So 36 years ago, we met at Squadron Officer School and began a grand adventure.
It was an interesting time because both of us were at a very competitive military school called Squadron Officer School. And at the time I was a squadron pilot. Annie was working in manpower, and we intersected at this school, and it was really, really competitive. And it was one of these almost like Survivor sort of things. Is somebody's going to get voted off the island. We were competing
against each other.
Yeah, in many ways we were competing against each other, because the reward at the end of Squadron Officer School is one person was going to be designated the distinguished graduate. And if you were a distinguished graduate, that was a career builder. I mean, if you came out of this school as a DG, then you would have been done really good. So it was an interesting setup, though, because we were in groups of probably 15 or 18 people.
I think something like that.
And there were probably 6 or 8 of these groups, and only one person. There's like maybe 200 people in the school at the time, and only one was going to get distinguished graduate. Now, to be a distinguished graduate, you personally had to excel at sports, your writing papers, your speeches, everything that you were doing academically, you were doing, plus the group that you were in had to exceed. So there was kind of this kind of yin yang thing. Is like, we all as a group of 18 need to do really well, but I need to do just a little bit more than you so that I can be the DG.
Were you in the same group then? Were you in the same group? Oh, so you were in the same group.
Yeah. In fact, the first time I saw Laura at the time come into our group, I thought, oh my God, this is the most gorgeous person I've ever seen in my life. She was a pilot. Well, he at the time was a pilot, and very, very attractive. I know it's a change. It's a change.
So this leads us to the obvious.
Change. Yeah.
When Annie and I met, I was a macho top gun.
You were like the Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I was a Tom Cruise kind of guy, and so we met under those circumstances, and eventually we got together, and eventually we got married. And amongst the first couple years of getting married, then I was in a chat room on then what was the brand new internet, and figured out that I was transgender, and it was like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
Wait a minute, time out. So you had no clue, Laura? I mean, you never felt, I mean, you just thought you were, I mean, did you have any inklings at all?
This is an interesting piece of the story. Anybody who's followed Caitlyn Jenner or many of the transgender stories that are out there, it's very common that people know early on that they are transgender. One of the things I knew is I knew I was different, but I grew up in a land of guys. I had brothers and a very strict stepfather, and there was not a lot of exploratory room in that world. So it never really occurred to me that there was a world called transgender, and I didn't really even have the term either. So one of the things that I found interesting is that when I went into a chat room, I followed these two people that were talking something about gender, and I don't know why, but I followed them, and I lurked in the chat room. So in those days, chatting meant you had your monochrome green screen with text coming down, right? And they're talking, and I'm watching their thing, but they don't know I'm in the room. So these two macho guys are talking about how they felt like they were actually women and that they had never heard of anybody else that was like this. And as they were talking, I'm like, oh my God, what they're talking about is exactly the feelings I felt for all these years. I just didn't understand that there was a thing
Right.
called transgender. So when I left that chat room, it was just like, oh my God, this is kind of like good news, bad news. You know, the good news is now I get why I'm not like all the guys, because I understand I grew up with brothers. I went to a fraternity, then I joined the Air Force and I was flying with men in the military. I mean, it was an all male society. And I knew I wasn't part of this group, but I didn't know why I wasn't part of that group until I had that meeting. But then think about this. Annie and I, when we were at that Squadron Officer School, almost our entire 11, 12 weeks was us arguing, and I say debating about whether we should stay in our marriage. And I was married at the time. Annie was in the midst of a divorce. And my position was, when you get married for life. You're chained together. That's it. They're never
chained. I love the chain term.
Yeah, well, and
that's changed though, Annie. He doesn't
It is. That's right.
that way anymore. That's a male thing.
I know. The ball and chain.
Really, the ball. But that was,
Okay, so Laura, let me go back. So at that point, you were still married. You kind of discovered. You already knew you were.
No,
I knew I was
pre. This was pre.
I didn't have this discovery until I had been divorced a couple years, and Annie and I had been married. I think we'd been married about a year and a half.
Yeah.
We in the first 2 years of our marriage, Annie was on the island of Okinawa, and I was on the island of Guam. That was our two first years.
And we were really close. I mean, only 2,500 ocean miles separated us.
So I mean, it's just like, it's like
We fly jet, so hey.
Yeah. No, that was their selling point. They said, well, you're on Guam and she's on Okinawa, and there's airplanes that fly every day. You can just hop a plane.
Right.
What they forgot to tell us was we had to actually be on leave orders to fly on that. So we had 30 days a year to be together for the first 2 years. But in the midst of all of that, then I had this chat room experience, and I was like, oh my God, I get it. This is going to be an interesting change when we're talking about change.
Right.
It's going to be an interesting change to deal with.
Actually,
was there any fear for you at all about, I mean, so okay, you make this discovery, which is a huge, and like you said, it was probably freeing, and yet, okay, now what's my next step? I mean,
and by far and away, if I have a whole chapter in the book called Fear, because as enlightening as this was to say, wow, I get why I'm different. think about what I had on the line. I'd spent 16 years to become a pilot in the Air Force, and I had finally made it. I had been through a divorce, and I just got married to Annie. We'd only been married about a year and a half. Absolute love of my life, and thinking, oh my God, if I share this, I'm going to lose her. I had 2 kids. I'm thinking if I share with them, I'm going to lose my kids. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my career. Is there fear? Everything that I had built to be at the top of the world was going to crumble if I let that secret out. And think about it, we were in the Air Force long before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We were in the don't tell, hell no.
Don't even think it, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I got to go back. How did your squadron do in that competition?
Well, one of the guys in our squadron became the distinguished graduate. It wasn't either of us.
It wasn't either of us.
Oh, okay.
We had a good time. Well, I learned a lot.
And we found each other, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's like
So you were the winners then.
We were the winners, yes.
Absolutely. All right. So let's jump forward. So now, how do you tell Annie this? How does that all come about, Laura?
I'll let Annie.
You're clueless, right, Annie? You had no.
I mean, I have this heartthrob, Top Gun pilot person that I've fallen in love with, and my Prince Charming was here, and so I remember her calling me because I was still in Okinawa. I remember her calling me and saying, Annie, I got something I need to tell you. Okay. And I'm thinking, well, and you got to understand, my first marriage, my husband, on the way to visit my parents a week after we'd been married, tells me that he thinks we shouldn't have gotten married. So when Laura tells me this, I'm going, okay, yeah. And without any, warning or anything like that. But she says, I think I watched this, just like she told her, I watched this thing on CompuServe, and I found a term for why I feel different. And I feel different because I'm transgender. It's like, well, what exactly does that mean? And at that point, we really didn't know what that meant. And I think the best opportunity that we had was learning through it together and communicating about it. Because again, we were still separated, and we wrote letters and did tapes and called infrequently, but probably more than we could afford. And, we were able to explore that idea together. But for me, it was something that was more in thought than in practice. It wasn't something I was being confronted with. It's like, okay, this is how she feels. But that wasn't at that point anyway, a life-changing thing. It was more of a, okay, well, let's explore this and figure out what's going on. Because she was in tears, and she said, I just don't want to lose you with a kiss or anything. And so was I, but
And what year was this?
This was 1987. Yeah.
Right. So in the media, there wasn't that much on transgenders. I mean, I don't remember back then really even, you would see, like in entertainment, men dress, but never really, wasn't
in drag, but that's
right.
Much different. One of the things that we learned, and I think this is important to share, is that having been involved in the transgender community for years and years, we have always heard horror stories when a transgender person comes out of the closet and says, hey, I think this is who I am. And we have determined that part of the reason that happens, and it's especially true for male to female transgender, in that men are geared to suck it up, hold it in, tough it out. And so typically what we saw happen in the support group is that men would find out that they're transgender, and then they would hold it in as long as they can. Caitlyn, in her book, talks a lot about this. Caitlyn Jenner did not come out until she was my age, 65, when she first first actually kind of came out of the closet, and all because she did not want anybody to know that about her, and she thought, well, I'll hold it in. But part of what happens is you're holding in a secret like this, and you're living a lie, and after a while that your brain just can't handle that anymore. And eventually what happens, and I call this dropping the brick. Bob comes downstairs in a dress and declares to his wife, I'm now Bobby, and you're going to have to understand this and be with me. Now, one of the things that Annie and I had that was much different is that I told her right away what I had found. So we shared the information. The other thing that helped us, I think, in the end was the fact is that realized Annie and I were in the middle of our Air Force careers. We still had 10 years to go before we were going to get out of the Air Force. And so for 10 years, this was just our little secret. We knew about it. We talked a lot about it. What does this mean? What are you going to do? Are you going to have the surgery? How is all this going to work? But we didn't have to actually do anything. And it's interesting. Part of the way the book starts is kind of when I started making physical changes. As I retired, I got my ears pierced and my hair was going long. I started dressing. I started walking around. Testing out my new voice and all this. And all of a sudden it became real. And that's where the kind of the rubber hit the road, is like, whoa, this is happening. I mean, for 10 years, it was theoretically going to happen.
Right.
Well,
yeah. The question there. So did this jeopardize your careers? It sounds like it was, if it would have got out.
But if it would have gotten out. I mean, I remember we used to kind of play games or whatever. And so I would tell her that she had to wear a chemise or some ladies' underwear under her flight suit, so that was daring thrill of things. But we didn't let anybody know about this until long after Laura had retired, and she retired in 94 and I retired in 99. So now I had to go through this massive security clearance whenever I moved to the Pentagon. And part of what you have to take is a lie detector test. So they ask you some questions. They want to know if you're vulnerable to blackmail or things like that. So I did disclose during one of the security investigations that I was married to somebody who was transgender, but I also said my brother is gay and I have a gay sister. So, it's like, okay, I'm acknowledging it. So it's not a big
hiding, right?
I think it would have had more of an impact, I think, on Laura's career than on mine as the transgender person. But for me, it really didn't. And it was very interesting when, after I retired, we started our own business, and we ended up telling our employees this because we did a lot of traveling in our business, and we were coming back from a trip and going through the Atlanta airport, which is actually really huge. And we ended up seeing, as we're coming up the B escalator in the Atlantic airport, we ended up seeing one of our employees and his wife standing at the top of the escalator. So we're going, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, I was standing in front of Laura. So at the time I was taller than she was. And so I just said, okay. So I went up to James and said, hey, James, I don't know if you know, but this is Laura. Yeah. Laura is transgender.
No, you gotta imagine the shock of this. So here's kind of where we were. Annie was out of the military. I was out of the military. I got to a spot where I was living as Laura almost all the time, but we were not out to the people in our company. But like Annie said, we were traveling all the time, and I got to the point where I'm just going to dress like this and fly as Laura. And then when we get to the hotel or whatever, we'll changed when we get there. So now we're in the airport, in the Atlanta airport, probably 500,000 people a day. The odds of meeting somebody is like 1 billion to 1. And the fact that these two people this one guy, James, who is one of our senior executives, is literally standing like 4 feet from the top of the B escalator at the exact moment that Andy and I are walking up. And I'm dressed. We were not ready to have a confrontation with our employees right at this moment. And it was one of those things where, time stands still. So the escalator's moving forward. Annie gets off. He turns around and says, "Hey, Annie." And I'm just like, what am I going to do? Do I just kind of like move on, pass by? How's this going to go? Then we're right there. They're just like standing right in front of us. And here I am, 6'3", standing behind Annie, dressed as Laura. And it's just like deer in headlights. What do you say?
You didn't go trick or treat?
Yeah. So what? And I have to tell you, it was unbelievable, because Annie just goes, like she said, she just turned to James and Trish and just said, "Oh, hi. Say, this, you probably don't know this, but Laura's transgender, and this is how she flies. And how was your vacation?" We talked about our vacation, blah, blah, blah. And, it was like, "Okay, see you back in Pennsylvania." And we walk away, and I'm just like, what the hell happened? I mean, they didn't shock. They didn't say anything. They didn't even acknowledge, really, other than they knew I was there. I didn't say anything.
Maybe they already had an inkling. Maybe they had already, you don't think so?
Well, we told the company as a group in a later meeting. And they were all pretty surprised. But of course, this was after we told the kids. Now, that whole story of how Shelley found out is a story in itself, and then telling the boys. And fortunately, all of them were very accepting, and they were in college at the time, and this was like a kind of a non-issue now. It had become, oh well, yeah, we know people that go to these, rainbow things, and that's just not a big deal. For me, and there's a question: how did I respond, and what about the kids and friends?
Right.
As I said in the beginning, it wasn't a big deal. It was more, to me, like a sexual fantasy sort of thing. So Laura liked dressing in women's clothes, like wearing women's underwear, which was kind of the first step. And so that was the secret, and that was kind of fun. It was something that we were sharing, and it gave us a lot more closeness, I think, because of the shared secret.
These two mature people.
Yeah. What was difficult for me was really when we moved from Hampton Roads, where Laura had retired, to Stafford, Virginia, which is where we moved for my last assignment at the Pentagon. And that was the tougher period of time for me, because Laura had started growing her hair out. She had her ears pierced. She wanted to get her nails done. We were going to support group meetings, and what I found was I was having to change into something that I didn't feel was really who I was either, because Laura ended up dressing when we traveled. I was very uncomfortable with that for a long time, because I'm very much a heterosexual female, and so being perceived as somebody that's a lesbian, part of a lesbian couple, was very uncomfortable for me. And so in a lot of ways, the change affected both of us. And I have eventually, or over time, I guess I'll say, I have started not to think about it anymore. I really, this is how we are. This is who we are. And I mean, it kind of goes along something with retirement and being able to be who you are without the expectations that you are a certain way at work or in other aspects of your life. So I did my share of crying in the bathroom, sitting in the bathtub, weeping about what happened to my Prince Charming. Who am I now? What does that make me? Am I going to stay?
We're princesses now.
Yes, there you go.
Both of you are princesses now, right? So was it difficult? Were you afraid to tell your, I mean, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, if I had to tell my children, I mean, this is like such a shift in their paradigm, I would think, but I guess not. But like you said, luckily they were older, and it's like I always tell like my kids who are millennials, being gay is like a non-issue. It's like, oh, he's gay. Oh, yeah. Whereas when I was growing up, it was a big deal. But so that's so. What was the story about your daughter though? What was it about her finding? How did that happen?
Let me say one thing real quick before we go too far. One of the things I want to relate it back to anybody's experience, because as interesting and as challenging as having a transgender partner in a marriage is a huge change. And
I still hate the terminology. I want to call my husband. I hate partner. I hate the word partner because that implies something less than what we have.
Right.
I'm not quite ready to call her wife. So it usually ends up being spouse or just my honey bunny.
My honey bunny.
I like that. Honey bunny. I like that. My honey bunny.
Even that exchange, one of the things that we found, and it's true for whatever is going on in your relationships, is it really does take a lot of time and effort to talk to each other, to say, did you mean this? Did you mean that? Why did you say this? What are you going to do? How's this going to happen? What are you going to do? I mean, we spent a lot of time discussing this. And like I say, we had 10 years before we got out of the Air Force to have lots and lots of discussion. But that still did not prepare us for the fact that when the physical changes start happening, it was like, wow, this is not what I thought I was prepared, but maybe not. The other challenge that they're talking about, telling the kids and seeing how the kids are doing. Again, in support group, I can't tell you, hundreds of people, almost unanimously, anybody that came out while we were in Washington, D.C., lost their job, lost their family, lost their kids. We went through this a number of times. Because it was just at that period of time, it was just hugely unacceptable. Now, as times changed, then things got better. And as Annie said, it was funny when Shelley, the Shelley story was funny because I was in a spot in my transition where I was basically home alone for a period of time. Annie was traveling in the business, and she was gone a lot, or she was up at the Pentagon a lot, and our daughter was living with us, but she was going to work from like 3 to 11. So about 3:30, I would run into my closet and get all my girl clothes out, and I'd start learning how to do makeup, and I'd get learn to walk in my shoes and did all these. I got my wigs out and did all this stuff. And so I was at a phase what I call I think every woman has their blonde phase. I guess you're still in it.
I'm still in it.
So I had on my this really long, curly Lady Godiva blonde wig on, and I'm walking around and thinking, "Oh, this looks really good. I really like this." And so I was sitting in the kitchen. By this time I got all my makeup on and stuff, and then I was just sitting in the kitchen reading a book. When all of a sudden I hear the basement door open. It's like, what was that? And I'm thinking, well, now think about this logically. I'm all alone. I know Annie's gone. Shelley's at work. The door opens. It should be a burglar. So I opened the basement door to see if the burglar was coming up. I was like, what? I opened the door, and halfway up the stair is Shelley. She had gotten let go at work early, and she was coming up the stairs. I was totally unprepared for this. And
so was she.
and think about this. I mean, she was, I don't know, about 20 years old at the time. And I mean, she could have screamed. She could have, and this is another one of those time slows down to, I'm thinking, man, I could slam the door and run out the front door. I could slam the door and run into the other room and change and go, did you see that lady that ran out? There was all these things I could have done. But in the end, I just said, I looked down, Shelley's just staring up at me. And I look down and go, hi, Shell, want a cup of coffee? And she's like looking up at me going, okay. And she came up And she sat down at the kitchen table. I got her a cup of coffee. I sat across from her. Then there was this, what seemed like a 3-year pause, but it's probably 5 seconds. Then she looks at me and she goes, "You know what? Dan, blonde is not your color." Oh, she accepted me. And I mean, again, she could have screamed, she could have yelled, she could have done anything. I thought the funny part too is her second question was, "Does mom know?" Yes, mom knows. Yeah, no, you don't. But
I mean, that just makes my heart I think that is beautiful. And I love, part of what I love about your story is how, I mean, this was a change for both of you, a change that neither one of you really, when you went into this relationship and fell in love and committed to each other, that you were expecting, kind of like what's going on in the world. But what I liked about because how many people, when your relationship gets rough or you're not the person I thought I married, they're out the door, right? Yeah. But I told Laura secret too. Yeah. Maybe that had a lot to do with it. But go ahead, Annie.
I would say I told Laura that she could leave anytime she wanted to, but she would be dead shortly thereafter.
Oh.
Feel free to choose to leave. You'll just be dead when you do.
Right. Oh, but see,
I realized too that both of us had previous marriages. I grew up as a kid, a divorced kid. I knew how challenging it was to be a kid of divorce. We both entered into this relationship, and it's kind of an interesting thing, because remember, we were arguing for 11 weeks about whether the rule was you go back and you fix your marriage and stay in a marriage, or whether there is a time where you could actually leave a marriage. And
while you were married, Laura.
So when she was at Squadron Officer School, she was going through her divorce, and she came and told me, I'm going back and I'm going to get divorced. And I said, no, you got to go back. You got to go back and fix this thing. You got to.
I told her she needed to walk in my shoes. What I didn't realize is that the size she needed had to be much larger than mine.
Yeah. I could walk in your shoes if I could put my toe in your shoes. But it was, this is important, I think, for anybody in a relationship. Is you're absolutely right. One of the things I've learned about female world is that women actually, at least in our generation, grew up with kind of the Cinderella story. Your job was to look beautiful in high school, and then you're going to attract the quarterback, and you're going to get married, and then you're happily ever after. They never say what happens after that. Is happily ever after. And then people get into a relationship and a marriage, and they go, "This is not what I wanted." And we grow up in a commercial world where if you don't like it, chuck it out, go sell it at the flea market, and let's get another one. And right. So there is a lot of pressure to say, well, if you change, I'm leaving.
You're disposed.
That's not who I married, right?
Yeah.
This is not who I thought I married. You're not the same person I married, right?
Or we married someone who we thought we could love enough to change and be the person that we wanted them to be.
Exactly.
Which was what my first marriage was about.
Yeah. Well, and it is true. I mean, there was that, in female culture, there is that, if I love him and
I just need to,
he'll get better. And
yeah.
Better. I got totally better. I totally understand you now. I totally understand you.
So Annie, you had already kind of made that decision to leave, but what about you, Laura? You were still in your marriage, and then.
Yeah, so here I am arguing for 12 weeks. This is the way it has to be. This is the way it has to be. And when I got back, I had a much different challenge, and a challenge that I didn't really realize until I got back. Because one of the challenges I had in my first marriage was that I was so intent on getting to pilot training that everything that I did in my life was hinged at going to pilot training. And when I met my first wife in college, and we were dating, sometimes I think this is kind of cruel to say, but I literally told her one night, she said, well, can't we just go to a party? And I said, look, here's the deal. I'm at college to go to ROTC to get into pilot training. There's nothing more important in my life than that. Now, I like being with you, and if you can settle for being number 2 priority, I'm in. Now, probably with the same thought that Annie had, well, if I love him and everything, he will change. But
And he did.
well, so what happened is we did get married. Neither of us had been in the military. Neither of us had come from any sort of military background. So I was commissioned into the Air Force, and my first wife, Kathy, and I started into an Air Force career, not realizing how incredibly lonely that is for an Air Force spouse. I was gone for, in 7 years, I probably saw her 3.
Wow.
I mean, every 3rd week I was on nuclear alert. So for probably 10 days a month, I was sitting at the end of the runway. And then if I'm not doing that, I'm flying. And if I'm not doing that, I'm going to one of these schools,
Right.
and the deal continually was, well, as soon as I get through this school, it'll be better. As soon as I get to that, and then eventually when I get to pilot training, it's going to be perfect. Then we're going to have a 9 to 5 life. Well, I did go to pilot training. It was the hardest year of my life. She hardly saw me for that whole year. When we got back, I was now graduated. I was out of pilot training. And so we bought a house in Texas, and this was going to be my 9 to 5 and everything. And within about a month, I came back home and said, oh, by the way, there's another school I get to go to for 4 months or 3 months. It's that, man, that was, yeah. Right. So by the time I got back, boy, that we were
wasn't out well.
Yeah.
So somebody wants to know about your experience.
Yeah. So the question.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, one of the defining moments, and this was kind of an interesting thing to think about as you're thinking about your relationship and how your life can be
change on a dime.
Change on a dime. One of the early experiences when Annie and I were in the Air Force, Annie eventually came down to Guam where I was. And I
traded in all my chips.
She traded in all her chips to be with me. That's a story in itself. But what happened is she was working in what was called a command post. A command post is a place on base that has 24-hour control of all of the weapons and assets that Strategic Air Command has. In case nuclear war starts, they have to be able to launch the airplanes and launch the missiles and all that. And so Annie traded all her chips to work in this command post. Well, when I go flying, I am talking all my 8-10 hour flight. We are always in contact with command posts, and they're there to help us do stuff. Well,
we can't say gooey things though. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, this is funny because Annie, we had. From Guam, there's not a lot of places we can fly. I mean, the bomber's mission was to fly and drop bombs in Mother Russia. And so we had to do it low level. And Guam's only 32 miles long. We couldn't really practice a lot, flying low. It's about 60 seconds worth of low level. So we would fly all the way up to Korea and fly around Korea low level, practicing our tactics, and then fly back. Well, it's 4.5 hours up, 4.5 hours back, and then we're in country for an hour and a half or something. So it's a long day, long mission. And so Annie's in the command post as we're climbing out of Korea on one of these missions, we get what's called a master caution light. There's so many things in our cockpit that we have one light that says somewhere in there's a problem. And that's right in front of my eyes. So because there's so many things that are hidden behind us. So the master caution light comes on. We're like, holy shit, when that comes on, there's something really bad's going on. We look around and it turns out we had a hydraulic problem, which in the end meant that I had only half of half control on my right wing versus full control on my left wing, which at the speeds and altitudes that we were at climbing out of Korea, not an issue. But what was the real emergency is when we slowed down to land, I had half turning ability to the right. And so all of that being said, then here I am climbing out of Korea, and I have to call back to command post and tell them, hey, we have an emergency. This is going to be a problem that we got to solve. Well, guess who's in the command post? We call back and say, hey, we have a call sign. I'll just use Buff 52. This is Buff 52, call command post. And Annie's like, yeah, command post.
I didn't say that.
Hi, honey.
Yes, Buff 52. How may I help you?
So, there's all this professional, there's very, Tom Cruise professional communication back and forth. But the ending of it is, this is like, holy shit, you have an emergency and you're going to come back and crash land on our base. Oh. And I might be witness to your death right here.
That's going through my brain, not hers.
In front of her. So that for 4.5 hours coming back, she's coordinating with Boeing in Seattle. And we talked to anybody and everybody that knew anything about this wing.
I got to call the general in the middle of the night. That was really fun.
So she's sitting here in the command post, and we're doing all of this stuff to figure out, okay, so once you come back and land and you're going to come down and set this thing down on the runway, are you going to have the right skills? Are you going to have the right fuel? Are you going to have the right everything? And in the end, obviously, I lived through it. Most have worked out.
That had to be some sweaty palm.
Yeah,
and one of the things that she had to do is that she had to do air refueling at night, and I think that there was a thunderstorm happening, so she was doing this drop this tube into my little nozzle here, and
it's the trickiest thing that we do, and it's really, really tricky if you have full control of your wing.
Let alone
it's a lot more interesting when you only have half control.
See, this is just the best pilot there is. That's what.
Right.
But
were you married then?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God!
And we knew that I was transgender. And the capper to the story is underneath my flight suit, I was wearing women's underwear during this whole event. So
that it gave her comfort skill,
Well,
but if there had been an emergency when you landed and your pants got ripped or something,
that was kind of that. In the end, a lot of what we learned from this is when you're in the military and I go to work, I may or may not come back. And as an officer in the command post, she might be tasked to be narrating and witnessing this whole
God.
And one of the things we talk about in the book is there was not a spot where I could say, well, honey, if I die, it's been great.
Right.
I love you, honey. That never, there's not a spot in our little communication plan for the honey, I love you sort of thing. So there's this whole restriction about, here we're in the midst of this dangerous event, and we both know that we love each other, but neither of us can really say anything about it. Now, thankfully, everything worked out. We got the fuel, we landed, the brakes didn't overheat, and life was good again. And then there was the questions like, man, should I be wearing women's underwear, or what happened
after that, then, Laura?
We were a little more careful. Now, I'd like to say that we held off for a while, but one of the things that I'm finding is that an important thing about living your authentic life, you can't put off living your authentic life forever.
Or for fear.
That you can't. We had a thing this morning. You can't live a life of fear is half lived. If you're fearful about everything you do, you're really not living. So one of the challenges that we had for the 10 years that we were in the Air Force is once I knew that was my authentic self, then there was this drive to like, well, can't we start moving towards that? And we were very, very restricted, obviously, in the Air Force as to what we could do. Now, that wearing underwear was one thing that was low risk that I could do, that I felt like, well, at least I'm making some attempt or some progress or some
Right.
thing.
Well, and the kids were still young then too, and so we had to be careful around them as well.
Yeah.
And Shelly was only 12, and I think the boys were 9 and 7. So,
Well, right, because they could slip and say, "Daddy's really, you know."
Well, yeah, or they, you know, if I'm wearing, I mean, we were in Guam, so it's shorts and t-shirts, and you know, if
Right.
they were to grab my pants and you know, what kind of underwear you got on, Dad? It's like,
Well, when we're all dirty, I grabbed some of Mom's.
yeah. Well, there's all these excuses that you pre-think.
Right.
But kind of like the top of the escalator, you know, it's like,
Oh, wow.
that was not a planned thing, and all of a sudden, you know, quick, what are you gonna do? It's like,
Well, I guess really too, what I love about your story too is how much your love for each other, how you still, you know, part of, I think, the bonding was the secret that you guys were doing together, and Annie, your support of, who is then Laura, you know, and what, like you said, you'd go off and you'd cry, and because this was not what you envisioned your life would be, but you love the person.
exactly.
You love the heart and soul of this individual. And isn't that what relationships is about? We're, you know, we think when we go into a relationship, this is the person, how they're going to be forever. And when I change, it's okay if I change, but you know,
You have to accept me for who I am now. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and so Laura, for anybody who maybe is going through this sort of stepping up and being your authentic self, what would you tell them? Because, you know, actually for you, it was good and it was bad in that you had a process, a time period where you kind of processed it. Was that good or was that bad? Or do you think if you would have been able to, if it would have been acceptable at the time, do you think you would have gone through the process faster? And would that have been good?
Well, I'll answer that from my perspective. I don't think that would have been a good thing for our marriage, honestly. And I think that's why it's so difficult when particularly a trans woman has carried this brick for so long that she can't stand it anymore, and then expects the wife to forego 20 years of marriage and the trust that they theoretically had with each other and with their kids and that sort of stuff. I mean, asking someone to make that dramatic a change in such a short period of time without any prior clue about what's going on is really unfair to the family, I think. I get the fact that it's really hard for the trans woman or trans person to hold that in, but I think that's where the mistake is made. I think you have to, if you truly love someone and you feel trust in a relationship, I think that you really have to be willing to take the risk to move forward, because otherwise you're saying, I really don't trust you. I really don't, I really don't have or think you have for me that pure, the pure love that would allow that to be accepted. And again, if it's got to be happening now, then that makes it so much more difficult. If you can work through it together, I think that's where your strength is that you both have the opportunity to grow with it. And, again, I understand that may stop some relationships early on or may cause problems, but if you're truly committed to each other and, like I said, truly trust each other, I think that's the only way to go if you want to be successful at it. And I think that is the same way for any change in your lives together, that you have to talk to each other and communicate those things with each other.
Well, and Laura, I honor you too for trusting Annie enough. I mean, that says a lot to me right there that it didn't seem like you really hesitated too much in talking to Annie, or did you?
No, I didn't, I'll kind of go along with what Annie is saying. There's a couple of things I think are important when you're talking about being your authentic self, and truthfully, that could mean you want to take up guitar or drumming, which I love. That might be your authentic self. You might want to write a book. You might want to, in this world, it's so funny because we often pick a career that we think is going to make us money, and then we're going to do our authentic stuff elsewhere or later, or when I retire, or and by then you've lost the bubble of your dream. And so I would say always chase your dream. But part of what that you need to understand is there's a huge amount of compromise and trust between us. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Annie and I, when we first started dating and thinking about maybe we should get together, one of the things that Annie was really, really clear about is this is not a game. If we're going to have a relationship, this has to be honest, 100% trusting and above board, and there's not going to be, gamesmanship in this. And so we really started out with if something's going on, you better tell me right now. So I think there was a lot of trust. But the other thing that I want to say is that there is a lot of compromise, and I'll give you one quick one. One of the challenges of male to female transition is that in a binary world, it's very important, at least it was for me in the beginning, to be seen only as a woman. So when we came out here to California, we didn't tell anybody about Lawrence, and I tried to pass myself off as just a woman. But understand that this is where it really got interesting, because if that's true, then who's she? We would start telling people we've been married 35 years. They go, wait a second, that can't be, because you're gay, right? It's like, oh, okay, see, now there's another challenge. And then, oh, she must be a lesbian. Well, no, there's another challenge. That's not true either. And then, what did you do for a living? Oh, I was a pilot. Oh, as a woman? That's not right either. So one of the things that we realized is that as much as I wanted to be seen, that I got to the point where I said, okay, I agree. I'm a trans woman, and we will introduce ourselves. I'm your trans husband. And that allowed us to talk about all of that. But there are hundreds and hundreds of little compromises and big compromises that we've made together. And that's the thing, together, talking together to say, this is important to me. Is it so important that you can't do this? There was Shelley's wedding. I came as a man because
that's what she wanted.
That's what she wanted. And I was at a spot where I could actually pull my hair back and take off my makeup and everything. I hadn't had augmentation yet, so I could fulfill that role. And that was a compromise to help other people, realizing that it wasn't authentically me, but sometimes I can't authentically be me.
Right. And we do adjust for those moments to help the ones that we love. We only have a few more minutes, and I really want to get into Laura. You do coaching, and I think you would be a great coach. So both of us, tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And Laura, I know you've been on the radio, you're writing a book, you guys are working on your story. So tell them a little bit about what you do. Yeah. Fly High Living there.
Fly High Living is my overall company presence. I do some coaching and some speaking. I like speaking a lot. But really this year, 2020, has really been about writing our book, which we call Major Transformation, Loving Without Limits, that describes what it's like to have a relationship where you have to make some big changes. So for those that are waiting, stand by. We have most of it written. We're just looking for publishing and all of that. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And in essence, that's our main goal for 2020, at least as far as I'm concerned.
for 2021? Because 2020 is almost over.
We'll continue.
So, well, you guys, I just love, we've had some really great comments about your story. And this is fun for me because I see people at church and hi, bye, but I never really get to sit down and really, I love this. It gives me the higher view of who people are and what you're doing. So Annie, you're retired now. What are you foreseeing? You're helping Laura or what? What are you doing?
Well, one of the things that we're both in Toastmasters, so I gave a Toastmasters speech this morning, and it was called Retirement, Becoming a Human Being versus a Human Doing. I know Dr. Joe has talked about that at some point, but I have started listening to meditations, taking a much more active role in my exercise life.
She's lost 25 pounds.
And I got him. For you.
I got him. I think you're right.
But really, we've talked about it. I mean, I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I was stationed at the Pentagon. I was the CEO of our own company. I was a senior healthcare executive at a state prison. And I was always defined by what I did. At least that's how I saw myself, because achievement is the way you get attention, right? And so what I've discovered since retirement is that I can be a human being instead of a human doing. And that's the part that I'm really exploring is, who am I? What do I want to be? What's my purpose in life besides loving this honey bunny? Or taking care of the dogs, or being a mom or a grandmom, just who am I and why am I here? And so that's, to me, the fun part of having the freedom to be able to do that. And, to be at home. We've spent a lot of our married life.
I see here.
We spent a lot of our married life apart. And so, it's a joy to be able to be home and hanging out with Laura, watching West Wing now is what we're watching. It's really interesting, the parallels between that show that's over 20 years old and what's happening
now. Yeah. That's a whole other talk.
That's a whole other talk.
Talk about change. You guys are such an inspiration, and you both have done so much at the Center for Community. They have the most amazing parties at their house.
We're looking forward to another one sometime soon.
Yeah, and you guys are just such an inspiration, and I really honor. I mean, I don't think. Lisa says, this has been amazing. It's so special to witness a deep, trusting relationship, no matter the gender roles. Thank you, Laura and Annie, for your authenticity. And that is so true. You guys, my kudos to you that you guys really are a team, truly are a team. And best friends and partners and lovers and you guys, the whole enchilada, it's just
we are the enchilada.
You're so tall, Laura, and your feet are so big. You guys could share clothes. Does this look good on both of us?
Well, we do share jewelry.
Oh, there you go.
Well, and hats. I like hats, and then she takes them. So
I got all my hats on.
David Flint says that it seems that all challenges can be seen through the lens of learning how to honestly love yourself and others learning to love you as you authentically are. I'm thinking that's what he's saying. So I think I thank you guys for coming on the show, and make sure you check out Laura's website and for more information. And when do you think that book is going to be out? We're going to have.
Yeah, it'll probably come out at the end of next year. The book is almost completely written, but there's like a lot of edits that go on before the book comes out.
I get to have my perspective on it too. Yeah. Laura's mostly been writing it. So.
Right.
Now that she's retired, she can put her.
Maybe there can be a section at the end where you give your little synopsis of your Reader's Digest version from your perspective. I think that would be cool too. So you guys are awesome. Thank you. Don't forget, people, to please support Center for Spiritual Living Palm Desert so that we can continue bringing these great guests. Next week, I have Daniel Namod on.
Great.
I love Daniel. Yeah, and I want to find out how he's navigating through this with his son that he's homeschooling. Plus, when you're depending on your income for providing music, I want to see what's going on with Daniel. So I love you guys. You guys have a wonderful Christmas holiday, and thank you again for hug. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks so much.